You're scrolling through your phone on a random Tuesday night, and someone from your college friend group posts a photo in front of a house they just closed on. Somebody else is announcing a promotion with a title that sounds impressive, even if you're not totally sure what it means. And you're sitting there in bed, in the same apartment you've had for 3 years, doing that quiet mental math you don't say out loud. Am I behind? Should I be further along by now? Everyone else seems to have this figured out, and you're just over here hoping your car doesn't make that weird noise again before payday. Here's what almost nobody tells you. The things that actually mean you're financially ahead of most people your age rarely show up in a photo. They don't post well. There's no picture of, I didn't panic when my rent went up, or I actually have a number in my head for retirement. The stuff that genuinely matters is invisible, which means you could be doing better than almost everyone you're comparing yourself to and have no idea. Because nobody's Instagram story is captioned, I have 3 months of expenses saved and sleep fine at night. Before we get into the content of this video, I want to note that all information in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Always consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions regarding your money. Now, let's get into the video.
My name is Emma, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why women in particular get handed either oversimplified advice or advice that assumes they're already starting from 6 figures and a paid-off car. If you've ever felt like you're falling behind, even though you can't point to anything you're actually doing wrong, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see your own progress more clearly. Today, we're going through 8 signs that you're actually financially ahead of most people your age, even if it doesn't feel that way. Count how many apply to you as we go, because I think the number is going to surprise you. And stick around until the end, because there's a trap hiding inside this exact kind of list that I need to warn you about before you walk away feeling either falsely reassured or, worse, complacent. Sign number 1. You know your actual numbers. Not a vague sense of, I think I'm okay, but the real figures. What you make after taxes, what your fixed expenses add up to every month, what you owe down to the dollar. This sounds almost too simple to count as an achievement, but here's the truth. Most adults actively avoid looking at their full financial picture because uncertainty feels safer than a number that might confirm their fears. There's actually a name for this in behavioral economics. It's called financial avoidance. And studies on the topic have found that a significant percentage of adults report skipping bills, statements, or account balances specifically because looking at them creates anxiety, even when checking wouldn't change the outcome at all. If you've ever opened your banking app and actually looked at every transaction instead of just checking the balance and closing it immediately, you are already ahead of a huge percentage of people your age because you've done the one thing that makes every other financial decision easier. You've removed the fog. Knowing your numbers doesn't fix them by itself, but it's the precondition for fixing anything, and most people never even get that far.
Sign number 2. You've never taken a payday loan or a buy now, pay later plan just to cover groceries. This one seems small, but the psychology behind it is significant. Needing to borrow against a future paycheck just to eat this week is one of the clearest markers of true financial distress. And if you've managed to avoid that even during tight months, it means you've built enough of a buffer or enough discipline in your spending order that you're not living on the edge of collapse. You might still feel broke. You might still be stressed about money, but there's a difference between stressed and drowning. And if you've stayed on the stressed side of that line, that's not nothing. That's actually a foundation. This distinction matters more than people realize, because a lot of financial content lumps every level of struggle into one category, and that's simply not accurate. Someone who's tight but never had to borrow against next week's paycheck is in a fundamentally different, more stable position than someone caught in that cycle, even if their bank balances look similarly low on paper. Sign number 3. You have some amount of money that isn't earmarked for anything specific. It doesn't have to be $5,000. It could be $400, sitting quietly in a separate account that you're not mentally spending before it even lands. Having any amount of untouched, unassigned money means you've broken out of what psychologists call the scarcity loop, where every single dollar gets consumed by an immediate need the moment it arrives. If you have even a small cushion that exists purely as a cushion, your brain has room to make decisions from a place of choice instead of pure survival. And that mental shift is worth more than the dollar amount itself. Research from Vanguard has actually found that just $2,000 in savings correlates with a meaningfully higher financial well-being score than having none at all. And the jump isn't about what that money can technically buy, it's about what it does to the constant background hum of financial threat your brain is running. If you've got any version of this cushion, even a modest one, you're ahead of the significant portion of adults who report having little to nothing set aside at all.
Sign number 4. You've had at least one moment where you said no to a purchase you could technically afford because you decided it wasn't worth it to you. Not because you couldn't pay for it, because you looked at it and thought, that's not where I want this money to go. This is a much bigger deal than it sounds like. Most people spend based on impulse or social pressure, following whatever their environment is signaling they should want next. The ability to consciously decline a purchase you can afford is a sign that your spending is starting to be driven by your own priorities instead of your environment. And that single shift is one of the strongest predictors of long-term financial stability that exists. It's the difference between money controlling you and you controlling money, even in small, unglamorous moments that nobody else ever sees or knows happened. Sign number 5. You know what your credit score roughly is, and you check it more than once a year. This isn't about being obsessed with a number. It's about the fact that avoidance is the default for most people when it comes to anything that might reveal bad news. If you're willing to look, even when you're scared of what you might find, that willingness itself is a sign of financial maturity that a lot of people twice your age still haven't developed. Let's meet Priya for a second. Priya is 29, works in healthcare administration, and for years refused to check her credit score because she was terrified it would be low. She'd open the app, see the little notification bubble reminding her the number was available to view, and close it without looking, sometimes for months at a time. When she finally looked, it wasn't perfect, but it also wasn't the disaster she'd built up in her head. Just seeing the actual number let her make a real plan instead of living with a vague sense of dread that colored every other financial decision she made. That's the value of sign number 5. It's not the score itself, it's the willingness to look, because that willingness is what turns a vague, formless anxiety into a solvable problem with an actual next step.
Sign number 6. You've talked about money with at least one other person in your life without pretending everything is fine. Financial shame thrives in silence. If you've ever admitted to a friend that you're stressed about a bill, or asked a coworker how they negotiated their salary, or told your partner the real number instead of a rounded down version, you've done something that statistically most people actively avoid. Money secrecy is incredibly common, woven into how most of us were raised to talk, or specifically not talk, about finances. Breaking it, even once, even with just one person, means you're not carrying this entirely alone. That matters more than people give it credit for, because isolation is what makes financial stress compound into something heavier than the numbers alone would suggest. A stressful number shared with someone else tends to feel manageable. The exact same number, carried in total silence, tends to feel catastrophic, even though nothing about the actual math has changed at all. Sign number 7. You've recovered from at least one financial mistake without spiraling into giving up entirely. Maybe you overspent one month and had to eat cheaper for a few weeks. Maybe you missed a payment once and had to call and fix it. Maybe you opened a store credit card for a discount you regretted almost immediately. The mistake itself doesn't matter nearly as much as what you did afterward. If your response was to adjust and keep going instead of deciding that budgeting clearly doesn't work for you and abandoning the whole effort entirely, you've already built the exact skill that separates people who build wealth slowly over decades from people who stay stuck in the same patterns indefinitely. Resilience after a financial misstep is a far stronger predictor of future success than never making one in the first place, because realistically, nobody never makes one. The people who eventually build real security are not the people who never stumbled. They're the people who stumbled and kept walking anyway.
Sign number 8. You think about your future self as someone real, instead of an abstract stranger. This shows up in small ways, contributing anything at all to a retirement account, even a tiny percentage. Reading one article about how compound interest works because you were genuinely curious, not because someone assigned it to you. Thinking even briefly about what your life looks like in 10 years instead of only the next 2 weeks. Researchers who study financial decision-making have found that people who feel a strong psychological connection to their future self make measurably better long-term financial choices, saving more consistently and carrying less high-interest debt, because the future stops feeling like it belongs to someone else and starts feeling like it belongs to you. If any part of you has started planning even loosely for a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet, that's sign number 8. And it's one of the most powerful predictors on this entire list, because almost every other good financial habit eventually traces back to this one. So take a second. How many of those 8 applied to you? If you're sitting here with 4, 5, 6 of them, I want you to actually let that land. Because most people who feel behind financially are not doing nothing.
They're doing quite a lot of the right things, quietly, in the background, in ways that never make it into a highlight reel. The sense of being behind isn't coming from an accurate assessment of your actual financial behavior. It's coming from comparing your real, messy, in-progress life to someone else's carefully curated version of theirs, which is, by definition, an unfair comparison, because you're comparing your full, unfiltered reality to their highlight reel. Here's where I need to be honest with you, because this matters just as much as the reassurance. These 8 signs are not a finish line. They're not permission to stop paying attention or assume everything will sort itself out from here on its own. The trap that catches people right after they feel reassured is relaxing so completely that the habits which got them this far quietly start slipping. Knowing your numbers is only useful if you keep looking at them regularly. Having a small cushion only protects you if you keep protecting it, instead of letting it slowly get spent down without noticing. These signs describe a direction you're moving in, not a destination you've already reached. And the women who actually build real long-term security are the ones who take this reassurance and use it as fuel to keep going, not as an excuse to coast for the next few years. There's also a comparison trap hiding inside this whole list that I want to name directly, because I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't. It's tempting to use these 8 signs as a new scoreboard, counting yours against a friend's or feeling smug if you hit 7 out of 8 while someone else hit 3. That's not the point. And if this list turns into a new source of comparison anxiety, it has completely failed at its actual job. Everyone starts from a different place, with different circumstances, different family support, different obstacles that never show up in a headline or a checklist. The purpose of this list isn't to rank you against anyone else, or even against your past self on some rigid timeline. It's to help you notice progress that was already there, quietly, underneath the anxiety telling you that you were somehow failing at something everyone else had already figured out.
Let's go back to that Tuesday night for a second. Scrolling through a friend's new house, a coworker's promotion, doing that quiet mental math that made you feel like you were somehow behind. Here's what's actually true. That house doesn't tell you whether your friend has an emergency fund, or whether they're one bad month away from real trouble behind a mortgage they can technically afford but can't comfortably sustain. That promotion doesn't tell you whether your coworker knows their own numbers, or has ever talked about money without pretending everything's fine, or has ever recovered gracefully from a financial mistake instead of spiraling. You have no idea what's underneath anyone else's highlight reel. And meanwhile, you might be sitting on 5, 6, 7 of the actual signs that predict long-term financial security, without a single photo to prove any of it. Being financially ahead was never about what shows up in a feed. It's about the quiet, unphotographed habits, the willingness to look at hard numbers, the small cushion nobody sees, the conversation you had when you admitted things were tight, instead of performing that everything was fine. The mistake you recovered from instead of abandoning ship over. If several of these already describe you, you are doing better than the anxious voice in your head is giving you credit for. Keep going.
Protect what you've built and keep building on top of it instead of assuming the work is finished. And stop measuring your very real progress against everyone else's highlight reel. Because you were never actually behind. You just couldn't see the parts of your own progress that don't post well.